I've picked out all my plants and set them in the garden where I'm going to be planting them. So spacing is incredibly important when you're planting your vegetable garden. And I think that's something that most gardeners get wrong, at least new ones, because it's very difficult to visualize exactly how big these plants are going to get. At the beginning of the season, they're just these little bitty things, and you think, I'll just put them 1 foot apart. Well, at the beginning that seems okay, until 2 months down the road, you realize you've got a jungle on your hands and your plants are crowding each other out. So spacing is key. I cannot emphasize that enough. I've got my tomatoes spaced 2 feet apart and my sweet peppers spaced 18 inches apart. And you can find all this information very easily if you just Google the vegetable you're trying to grow, or you can look on the back of your seed packet or plant label. To keep the rows parallel and in line, I used twine. So this year I'm really focusing on keeping my garden nice and tidy, neat and organized, because, well, it's in my front yard and I want it to look really nice. In the past, I really kind of threw things in haphazardly, didn't space things the best. And this year it's going to be incredible. It's going to be really nice, neat rows, traditional garden style. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this vegetable garden loaded down with fruit. Okay, so let's get planting. Right here, I've got a hot paper lantern habanero pepper. It's a hot pepper. And since we've already mixed in the granular fertilizer, we really don't need to add anything to the planting hole. Some people like to add things like Epsom salts and different materials like that, but I don't think it's necessary. I've never used that in the past. But one thing I do like to do is add some ground eggshells. So I dig a little hole like this, just deep enough for the plant to go in. Very simple. Make sure the soil in there is nice and loose. I saved some eggshells, dried them out, and ground them up with a coffee grinder that I use only for grinding eggshells. Here they are. I'm just going to add a little dusting. And to be honest, I don't know if this actually does anything. It's supposed to help with calcium, but if anything, it's just good to reuse those eggshells in the garden. So I got my plant, just pop it out of the cup. I'd mix the eggshells in a bit. Doesn't really matter. Plop down the plant and backfill the hole. And it really is that simple. I'm just going to give each of these plants a little water after I finish planting the entire garden, but this should be fine for now. And that's a healthy little habanero plant ready to take off. It's going to fill out this cage really nicely. In fact, it's probably going to get so big that I'm going to have to prune it back a little to prevent it from infiltrating the tomato row, but that's okay. It's going to be awesome. Before we continue planting, I just wanted to mention that you should try to plant in the evening. That way your plants will have the entire night to recover, and you'll be less likely to get transplant shock, which is something that happens, if you plant your plant and then the sun beats down on it all day. It's just not the best case scenario. So plant in the evening or on an overcast day. Okay, so now I'm going to plant a sweet pepper plant. This variety is called Super Shepherd, and I bought it at the store because I cheated, and that makes me a bad person. Okay, so we're going to dig a hole where the plant is to go, which is right here. Again, try to loosen up the soil, make sure it's nice and loose. This soil is really good. I'm really excited to see how these plants grow in it. So this plant in particular has a biodegradable pot. So you can see it's made of this cardboard type material, and what you do to plant these types is you just cut off this label here, actually tear it off. There's a little spot to tear it there. That's corrugated, or not corrugated. I can't think of the word. I'll pop it on the screen if I do. What I suggest doing is tearing off the top bit so that you've got about a centimeter or an inch of soil exposed. This way, when you plant it, the cardboard is not going to be sticking out of the soil and it's not going to wick water away from the plant. Personally, I like to just tear the whole thing off. I'm not a huge fan of having anything around the roots. Maybe that's silly, but it's just my personal preference. I take these pieces of cardboard though, and I just kind of break them up and toss them into the hole or just around the garden so they break down and basically compost. Very easy. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some powdered eggshells, just a dash, mix it in, and plant the sweet pepper. Okay, there you go. There's your sweet pepper planted in the garden, looking nice and healthy. Gonna water it in at the end, and it's just gonna take off and produce some really nice sweet peppers for us throughout the season. Now I'm gonna show you how to plant a tomato. It's pretty much the same as planting any other type of vegetable, except there is a small difference. So tease your plant out of its pot, and you can see it's got a really nice root structure, not root bound, but just really nice and healthy. What we're gonna do is we're gonna dig a hole, but it's gonna be a little deeper than what you might expect. A unique feature about tomato plants is that they actually can grow roots along their stem. So that's why I recommend you pluck off the lower branches, leaving a nice bare stem exposed, and then plant your plant up to those top leaves. So you're actually going to be burying a bit of the stem. I'm just going to pick off this leaf right here. Just pluck it off, you won't hurt the plant. And maybe dig that hole a little deeper. And what you can actually do, if your soil is maybe not the best deep down, you can lay your tomato plant in a trench. And this is especially useful if you have a super tall tomato plant. Maybe you started it a little too early and it's like a foot tall. That's happened to me before. Dig a bit of a trench and just kind of lay your plant in like this and turn it ever so gently upwards, and then just simply backfill the plant. And actually, I probably should have dug a bit of a deeper hole. Sometimes when you're making a video, it doesn't go quite as well as you'd like it to. Just dig a nice deep kind of trench there and lay your plant in kind of on a diagonal or on a horizontal, depending on how tall your plant is, and backfill it. Oh, I actually forgot to put in the eggshells. Man, I am really batting zero today. This channel is called LucasGrowsBest. It's not called Lucas Plants Best, okay? There we go. Now that is a big beef tomato plant. It's a nice red juicy beefsteak. I grow these every year because they're just phenomenal producers, and they produce really nice sized classic beefsteaks. You can see that much of the stem is buried and only a couple inches are sticking out of the ground. Just to clarify, the purpose of burying that stem is to get more roots, and more roots equals a much stronger plant that can absorb more nutrients and water much more efficiently. So it's just a very much needed, great, much thing to do, and it'll make your tomato plants really happy, and you'll be a proud gardener. Since I messed up the last one so badly, I'm going to plant another tomato seedling for you guys. This variety is called Sun Gold, and my parents absolutely love it, as do I, because it's a really nice orange, tropical, fruity tomato. Has a very sweet flavor. It's really, I think, probably the best cherry tomato you can grow. Some people will argue with me on that and say Sun Sugar, which is another orange cherry, is better. I've never grown it, so I couldn't tell you. And this soil is pretty good, so I don't really need to dig a trench. Another reason for the trench method, just while we're at it, is if you are in an area that is very wet, that gets lots of rain, and is relatively cool, it might actually be better than just planting it down deep in a hole, because if it's in a trench, the upper part of the soil is going to warm up quicker, and it's also going to dry out faster, so you won't have to worry as much about your plant being overwatered. That's just something to think about. I don't think it really matters, and in my case, I just do it based on how tall the actual plant is when I'm planting it. This one, again, I'm just going to pluck off the lower branches. I would say just leaving it the top 2 or 3 inches of plant material there for photosynthesis, and of course you don't want to destroy your entire plant. That would not be good. I'm digging some eggshells here, just a dash, because I don't have that much this year. And there we go. Just going to plant it up. And that is going to be a very productive sun gold, hopefully, in the future. So there's your nice sun gold plant. We're going to follow up with this later on, but I got to get the rest of this garden planted. So the sun's setting, and now I just have to plant up the rest of the garden, and that'll be that. And then pretty much it's just going to be a waiting game until it's time to harvest these vegetables. Of course, I'm gonna have to do pruning and some maintenance, watering the plants, because actually I tore out my irrigation system last fall because I thought that I wasn't gonna be doing a garden this year. That was a mistake, because now I've got to water everything by hand. But that's okay. Stuff happens. And yes, I do realize that there is a sedum blocking the walkway. That was just how the layout worked out. So luckily I have long legs and I can easily step over it. One thing I forgot to mention is do not forget to label. So I finished planting all the tomato and pepper seedlings, but now it's time to get the cucumbers in the ground. So come on, let me show you how it's done. These are my cucumber seedlings that I started indoors about 2 weeks ago. As you can see, they're looking pretty nice and green, healthy, and this particular variety is called English Telegraph. It's an English cucumber, or slicing type, and an important thing to note about cucumbers is that they're quite sensitive to transplant shock. So I would recommend planting only one plant per container. That way you don't have to separate them and risk disturbing those roots. Last year in my home garden, I planted the cucumbers in these concrete reinforcement wire cages that I built back in 2015, and that worked pretty well. So I'm going to be doing that again this year. You can see I've got one cage there, one there, and one at the back there. They blend in really well. They're the same color as the brick and the mulch, and that's what's so cool about them, is that they're very inconspicuous. So last year I planted 4 plants per cage and spaced them about a foot apart. This year I'm going to be doing only 3 per cage because I think they were a little crowded last year and I'd like to give them some more space. Hopefully that'll help me get more cucumbers and more healthy, manageable plants. But this is the formation I'm going to use. It's a triangle formation. These plants are about 1.5 feet apart, give or take, and they're just going to be growing up this trellis. It's going to be really, really awesome, and I can't wait to see it. So this soil has already been prepared. It's got the granular fertilizer in it. So now it's very simple. All I got to do is dig a hole. And I ran out of the calcium, or the eggshells, so I'm not going to be using any of those, but it doesn't really matter. And it's literally this simple. Completely planted. I've got peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers, my 3 favorite things to grow. I also love to grow pumpkins, but unfortunately it's not going to happen in the front yard this year. I watered my garden last night, so it really doesn't need it besides the cucumbers, which I just planted. But as I mentioned earlier, I ripped out my irrigation system, so now I'm going to have to do it all by hand this year. To start out with, I'm just going to be spraying over top of the garden. And I always say not to do that because, well, having water on the plants is really not the best case scenario, especially at night. But when they're young like this, it's okay. It's just when they get older and more bushy and the leaves start to really kind of bulk out and shade each other out, that's when you want to avoid watering from above. But at this stage, it's okay. Let me show you how I do it. Grab the hose, and don't do that. Because wow, did I just I just sprayed my camera. So you want to get some distance with this one because it's pretty powerful, but just a nice shower mode is good, and you just want to give your plants a nice deep soaking. You might have to stand here for like, I don't know, 10-15 minutes to make sure that the soil is thoroughly soaked. But anyway, let's continue.
I was falling through the sky on the waves of time for 1 billion miles. In the wildest of my dreams, I was going down the rabbit hole to the other side.
Yeah, 10 minutes was definitely an overestimation, but basically you just want to ensure that you give your plants a good drink after you plant them, and make sure you do this fairly consistently for the next couple weeks, just until they get established. Especially if it's hot and sunny and dry, you want to make sure that the roots are always getting that water they need. If the soil's moist, you don't need to water, so just pay attention, be diligent, and keep your plants alive until they get onto the next stage in their life, which is the establishment and fruiting stage. I'm really excited about this year's front yard garden. It's like nothing I've ever done before, because this year I've got the rows spaced nicely, the plants are a great distance apart, and I've got these really cool string trellises that I'm trying out. And I'm a little worried about them. I think I made a mistake by choosing these 1x2s. I should have gone with the 2x2s. They were a little more expensive, about double the cost. And I wanted to do this garden on a shoestring budget, but I may decide to swap them out for the thicker stakes potentially, because I'm a little worried these are going to snap. But you know what? Sometimes you make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, like I've said before. And you know, you learn with trial and error. That's what I love about gardening, is that you can make mistakes and you can still be successful. Thank you so much for watching. But before you go, I'd love to hear how you plant your garden. Do you plant yours similar to mine? Do you think that my tips were helpful? And what would you do to improve upon my tips? Maybe I left some things out, I forgot to mention something. If you have any comments or questions, leave those down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. I'm Lucas. I love to grow vegetables. It's what I do, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.